Welcome to Crafting a Living. Today's guest is Manfred Haf. Manfred studied marketing and advertising at UCT, and he started his career at the Rembrandt Group as a tobacco salesman. In the early 70s, he was part of the team at Intercontinental Breweries, where the Rembrandt Group took on the mighty SAB. Later in his career, he used his experience to bring the Windhoek beers to South Africa, and he now is the sales manager for Flare Beverages, who import Erdinger, Paulaner and Bitburger beer. Let's welcome Manfred. I used to work with Manfred many years ago, and Manfred is back in the beer business. Welcome, Manfred. Manfred, you started in the beer business. When was it? How old were you?
Well, it was 1973.
1973.
When I was involved in the development for Intercontinental Breweries, which led to the launch of Kronenbrau 1308, subsequently Heidelberg Lager. We're talking also Sportsman Lager. Then right at the end, we had Kronenbrau Light, the first light beer ever launched by Intercontinental Breweries. And unfortunately, that career, although it was most satisfying and was 7 years of my life, ended very dramatically with the sale of Intercontinental Breweries to SAB as part of the share swap to gain control of Stellenbosch Farmers for Distillers Corporation, which ended up in the mighty Distill as we see it today.
So for me, immediately I've got memories. So that was 1973. I was born in 69, so I wasn't very old then, but I can clearly remember on a Sunday on the family farm where the uncles used to drink Kronenbrau, or at least they were still using the mugs maybe.
Hopefully they were drinking it as well, not using just the mugs.
And then I can remember my father was a keen fisherman, and in 1976, I think, or 78, he went and he won the Sodwana ski boat fishing competition with the biggest black marlin, of which a replica was made, and I think one of them is in the Durban aquarium in those days. It's probably not in Oshaka anymore, but in the old aquarium they had a replica made of that marlin. And the reason why I'm mentioning it, the prize was a mug of Heidelberg.
Oh my word! Yeah.
Glass mug.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've got memories of those brands. I don't remember the other brands.
Well, the Sportsman Lager was aimed at the young drinker. You know, where Kronenbrau and Heidelberg were very traditional German-style beers. Okay. They came with heritage from Germany. I mean, Kronenbrau, the brewery 1308 is when that brewery in Germany, actually Drei Kronenbrauerei, actually started brewing beer.
In 1308.
In 1308. So when we launched the Kronenbrau, we actually launched it with that German heritage going back to 1308.
Was it under licensing?
Basically, the little tiny brewery was the rights, international rights were bought by the Rembrandt Group, and that gave us the rights to it. I had the privilege of visiting the little brewery on several occasions, and it's still brewing beer today. It serves a little local community, a pub and a little bit of a restaurant, and the locals come with their 2-litre and 5-litre container and actually fetch their beer from the brewery and take it home. So it's very much in the old style and tradition of Bavarian brewers.
So in Bavaria?
Yeah, in Bavaria. I mean, you know, Holger, I mean, at that time there were well over 600 little breweries in Bavaria.
Really?
There were some mighty big ones, but there were also very little ones which basically served a little village or a little Bauernhof, etc.
Wow, that's and in Bavaria, how far from Munich? I mean, as a reference point.
It is about quick one. You caught me on that. I would say plus minus 100 odd kilometers from an hour's drive from Munich.
Yeah, I'd love to find that brewery one day and go and visit it.
Well, maybe if we have a chance to go over in October, we can go and actually try and uncover it again, and you and I can have a beer there.
Yeah. I did a similar pilgrimage to the Kaltenberg brewery once.
Okay.
I visited, my brother-in-law was a tennis coach in Austria, and then we went to visit my sister who was living in Berlin or Leipzig, and we met in Munich, and we went to hunt for the the Kaltenberg Brewery, which is obviously the home of Prince Leopold von Bayern.
Yeah.
You say he was also involved somewhere along the line?
Yes, he was the director of Drei Kronenbrau, which was a registered company in Switzerland, which we used. One of the breweries we also owned was Swaziland Brewery, which became part of Intercontinental.
Okay.
And through that brewery, we did some international exporting, etc. And that is where the international company was created, which was not the local company, because of in those days, it was not so fashionable to export out of South Africa.
Yeah. Okay, so three Kronen.
Drei Kronen, yeah.
Three
Kronen, yeah.
Yeah.
3 crowns.
Okay. And then the other brands, Sportsman Lager?
Sportsman Lager, again, that was launched sort of, let's call it nearly 3 years after Kronenbrau. It was aimed at the younger market. It was it was very much sport orientated. We did a lot of sports sponsorship. It was a brand that we felt that would appeal to the younger people more.
Okay.
Where the
just going to move this mic a little bit closer, if you don't mind.
Where the German beers were more based on the traditional German heritage of beer making.
Okay.
And then the other ones were Kronenbrau Light, which was the first light beer ever produced.
Sounds like a 5-liter wine.
But it spelled like the Danish Kronenbrau.
Okay. Was it also then under license from?
No, it wasn't. It was our own, but it was basically original, first ever light beer produced in South Africa.
Okay.
And then the last beer that the company launched prior to its departure was a brand from America with an American image called Colt 45.
Yeah.
Which SAB must have got whiff of, and prior to our launch, they launched Stallion 54, and that really didn't. It all happened in the end, and actually that beer never made a mark in South Africa. But then, of course, the brewery was sold at that time.
Yeah, and I think that's what's probably been written about most, those two brands, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's how you call, if you use marketing espionage, and you actually then find a counter attack to somebody else's brand.
That sounds a little bit like in the late 90s when there was a Hofbrau launched by Namibian Breweries and SAB at the same time, isn't it?
Absolutely, very much the same sort of thing.
Yeah, the one was some Hofbrau and the other one was also Hofbrau. Yeah. But again, in Heidelberg, what was...
Heidelberg was basically also a German-style lager. Its claim was that we used Hallertau hops. Mm-hmm. It had a very hoppy, quite a spicy taste, a drier beer than Kronenbrau.
And you can remember all this.
Sorry?
And you can remember the taste.
Yeah, because, I mean, when you're involved in the differentiation of launching beers, you try and create a beer to suit certain segments of the market. And Heidelberg was created to appeal more to the drier, more the Pils type market, where Kronenbrau was definitely a lager, or Germans would have called it a Helles, which is easy drinking. Very, very, very easy drinking beer.
Preferably in a liter mass.
Yeah, and you could actually finish a mass with it quite easily.
Okay, so Hallertau hops is obviously one of the most famous hopses out of Germany.
It is the hops growing region in Germany, where I think, if my memory serves me correctly, was probably 90% of the German hops comes from that region.
From that,
and then there are certain selected hops were specially produced for this flavor and that flavor, etc. And one of the styles was that Hallertau hops that was used for Heidelberg, was there to give the Heidelberg that specific flavor and taste.
And what was the market like in those days? I mean, you came onto the market. There was only SAB, or were there any other players?
Well, I mean, prior to Intercontinental, of course, was...
well, let's start with you. What, you were straight out of school? Varsity?
No. I joined the Rembrandt group after varsity as a manager trainee or marketing trainee.
Where did you study in Cape Town? Stellenbosch.
University of Stellenbosch. Sorry, Cape Town. Stellenbosch. Although I've spent a lot of time in Stellenbosch with my friend, but I was University of Cape Town. I then joined the Rembrandt group. as a marketing trainee, or trainee managers we were called those days. And I spent my first, call it 12 months on the road selling cigarettes, cleaning POS, doing depots. I was also involved in the launch of the Freedom Parks under the banner of Dr. Anton Rupert. And I was very much on the cigarette side, and then I was moved to the international division at Rupert International, where I got my first marketing job. And from that led to the beer.
And what did you market?
But basically, I was on the cigarette side, product manager on the cigarette side, and then from there I got involved because of my German background with the Kronenbrau, and that's how I got involved in the beer side.
And did they make you smoke?
I did smoke in those days on my own. I willingly smoked, but I did give up smoking in '76.
And just tell us a little bit about the group in those days. Was it Distell? I mean, Distell didn't exist as we know.
No, it was Distillers Corporation, which was the one leg, and Castle Wine EK Green was the other liquor division. And then, of course, you had Rothmans, the cigarette companies. Was various companies. There was Dunhill, there was Rothmans of Pall Mall, there was Rembrandt itself, and then there was American Cigarette Company, which owned brands like Paul Revere and Peter Stuyvesant, and then there was the Rhodesian Company, which is Winston Tobacco, which owned brands like Gunston and Winston, etc. So yes, there were several cigarette companies, but on the liquor side there were two dominant companies: one Castle Wine EK Green and Distillers Corporation,
both owned by the Rupert.
And they were all owned by the Rupert Group.
Okay, and then Stellenbosch Farmers Winery was
opposition, and KWV was basically KWV, which was a cooperative at that time.
Okay, and the whole.
And then, of course, you had Gilbey's as well. In the liquor, if you took the liquor trade, there was Gilbey's as well, and then Union Wine, etc. I'm trying to think. There was, of course, smaller ones, but those were the major players in the liquor market as such.
So Gilbey's became Guinness UDV,
correct,
and then Brandhouse, and then Diageo.
Correct.
At least in South Africa. Yeah. So, and that was even then owned by the UK guys.
Correct.
Yeah. And Pernod Ricard and those guys weren't around the French.
Yes, they were, but they were not a significant players in those days.
Okay. And in terms of spirit, local spirit, was Edward Snell on the round?
I think Edward Snell.
I mean, they claim to be since 18 something, but
but
I don't remember.
I would probably, and I might be wrong on this, but I would say that if they were around, they were very small. I know still very much later in the liquor business, and today quite a dominating factor in the liquor business. But I'll be honest, just to remember, let's call it the mid-70s. If they were around, they were relatively a small operation.
We can certainly clear that up with Dave Kelly or Dave Hooper, but Dave Kelly certainly worked for Distillers, and we met Dave Kelly at Hillcrest the other day.
But his big one was Castle Wine EK Green. That's where he came.
Was that his background? And Gilbey's? No, Gordon's.
Gordon's, which was part of the Distillers.
Okay, so
Gordon's Gin.
Gordon's Gin was his big story. But then he ended up working for Edward Snell and.
That's right. He had his spell. And I think that's. I think where that refers to was more the 80s, I would say, rather than the 70s.
Okay. All right. And then, then there was a big deal with SAB and
basically
and the Rembrandt Group.
I was down in Stellenbosch. We did the beer presentation to the board, at which we put forward. Basically, our arguments why we should be here, the success we've achieved, and what we believe was the growth of the beer market versus. At that time, there was a lot of rumours around flavoured wine, and flavoured wine being the big entry and volume brand into the markets. We, as beer people, felt that beer was the right answer. But, of course, the decision was made. One can understand also that the Rupert's interest in wine was very strong, and I think it was quite attractive to get hold of Stellenbosch Farmers, which was a big player in the wine business.
Was it also cooperative?
No, they were not. They were a separate company, and they were dominant shareholders was SAB. So basically, the sellout of Intercontinental to SAB gave them the controlling, gave them SFW, which gave them a massive market in the wine and spirit business in South Africa, which today we all know as Distell, which is made up of distillers and Stellenbosch. That is where the combination comes from. And we all know today what a major player they are, both locally and internationally in the liquor business, in total wine and liquor business.
Yeah. I mean, I can clearly remember when I must have been first year varsity and we drove down to Stellenbosch or the Cape, all the way from Natal, and we ended up at Stellenbosch Farmers Winery because one of our mates had a connection who worked there, and we did a wine tasting, and I can remember getting a T-shirt which said, "Save water, drink wine," which I wouldn't wear today because... So Stellenbosch on its own survived obviously a long time until it became part of Distell.
Absolutely. I mean, they were a leading wine company, more wine-orientated than spirit-orientated, where Distillers was less wine and more spirit-orientated. So the merger, of course, gave them a number of additional wine brands, gave them a number of different entries into the market. So it was a marriage that definitely had advantages.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the market. I mean, you're selling beer again now. What was it like then?
Well, I think not very much has changed. I mean, we're talking a market that's many times bigger. You're talking many times more outlets. I think in those days, our biggest problem to sell beer was SAB was so dominant in the market. They controlled retail, they controlled hotels and on-consumption outlets, and it was very difficult when we came into the market to try and penetrate that. We were quite lucky that we managed to penetrate it. We did some very interesting marketing activities. We basically went in and you can literally say forced our beer into the outlets which were controlled by breweries. We were also very lucky that in those days the group did have its own retail chain, Western Provincials and Liquor Town, which gave us a little bit of a boost going into the market. But I think it was still, let's call it we had to conquer street for street, outlet for outlet, etc. And similarly, whether it was in Soweto or whether it was in Johannesburg or Pretoria, you had to go and try and get facings. You had to try and get entry into the liquor outlets through promotions, etc. You would slowly get people to drink our product. I think we were, I think part of our marketing was, I don't know if you recall, Holger, we had these beautiful handcrafted wagons. We had one big one which weighed nearly 5 tons, which was drawn by 6 and later 8 horses with 2 German coachmen. And
there's a word called dryman. What is a dryman? Is it the horse or the cart, or what? Do you know?
The what?
What is a dryman? It's not the horse. I mean, Dryman's Brewery is named after some...
Well, it could be a horse, but I know we used Clydesdales. We had these enormous Clydesdales which we imported.
I remember those.
And then we also built smaller wagons, which we then used in Durban and in Cape Town, etc., which were drawn by 4 horses. And with that, we were part of events. University Rags wanted us part of their procession, and I think we got a lot of exposure with those horse and wagons. We were very different. Through that we did interesting sponsorships, and slowly, step by step, we got bigger volumes. We got recognition. We got better facings, we got floor space, we got display space, etc., etc. So it all was a question of step by step by step going forward.
So you were definitely already a player when the deal was done. It wasn't.
Absolutely.
You weren't just starting off.
I think so far, with the exception of maybe today with the Heineken Amstel Windhoek merger, I think we gained the biggest penetration into the SA beer market and took the biggest share from SA breweries that anybody else that has up to date prior to now has taken from. We talked in those days if you split the markets in down Rembrandt, we had a dominant share in the so-called white market, and we had a smaller share in the black market. Really? But we were getting into it piece by piece, slowly. but our biggest share was of course in the affluent top end of the market. That's where we
the craft players today.
I think to a certain extent where craft is starting to play a role in that area, where people wanting something different. And yes, you've known that the old SAB brands for over years, and people just see something that tasted different and had a bit of a different story.
And did you use the Distell reps, or did you have your own reps?
No, we used our own. We had our own rep. I think the Costa Group liquor side of our business did help us. They did gave us, for example, we got information from them. We did ride on some of the back, but we had all our own people. Did you have to fill in new account forms, or was it wasn't delivered together with? No. Totally different. We had our own distribution, own trucks, so the whole lot. It was really. We were a totally separate operation, standalone operation as such.
Interesting.
Yeah, with our own sales managers, our regional managers, national sales manager. We product managers handling the marketing side, and we had merchandisers. So we were really a fully equipped liquor marketing operation.
Okay, and what packaging did you have? Cans, bottles, drafts?
We had in those days it was, I think, 375ml bottles, which were the returnables.
Yeah.
Then there was the non-returnable, which was the 340 as we know today, dumpy. And then, of course, there was the cans, the ordinary 340ml cans.
Okay, so you had returnable bottles there.
Yeah.
Wow.
So those were mainly for the on-con trade that we had those. But it wasn't a big volume. It was a relatively small volume. And then, of course, the quarts. I mean, the 750.
You had quarts?
Yeah, we had quarts as well, yeah.
And draft wasn't
yes,
a thing?
Right. Yes, draft was very much a Kronenbrau thing. Yes, we aimed at we started off what I always call pockets of excellence and created them, i.e. maybe the German clubs and the German activity centres, German school, etc. But then from there on it went out, and we definitely were a draft of choice down the line in the latter part of the operation.
And just remind us the timing. When was that?
Well, basically 1973. That was the beginning of Intercontinental Breweries, and it basically ended in 79 with the sell of the. So basically, you can say 7 years, just over 7 years, not quite 8 years.
And did you work directly with Dr. Rupert then, or?
Who?
You?
I personally had the privilege of meeting him and working when I was at Stellenbosch at head office. Yeah. So it was a great privilege to work with the top and his brother, which was head of marketing, and I was very close with him, J.A. Rupert. And then, of course, his other brother was J.P., which was responsible for the production side. And as the Belgians always said, to try and differentiate between the three brothers, they would say J.P., it was just production. J.A. was just advertising. And A.E. was about all and everything.
Can't imagine that massive organization being run by three brothers.
Yeah, well, I mean, there was other directors, Jan Herzog, etc. But those were the three brothers directly involved in the business. And I think I had the most dealing with J.A. Rupert, who's the marketing, the marketing. Let's call it Fundi in the group. And
okay, interesting. And then they sold the business under your feet.
Well, they basically sold it. I had an opportunity to go to the German Brinkmann arm of the cigarette business. That was an option that I had.
Yeah.
I felt
it was within the Rupert Group.
Which within the Rupert Group, yeah. I felt I didn't want to go back into cigarettes. As a matter of fact, I did feel a little bit hurt that 7 years of my life, which I really intensely worked for the brand, to have started, and I had an earning to go back into what I really wanted to go into, marketing and strategic marketing. And the best road for that was to go into advertising. And at that point in time, an old colleague, also Rembrandt colleague, Joel Loftus, he and I worked together, had started a small advertising agent called Safmark International. And I was asked to join them, and which I duly did. And we then later merged with a far larger agency, KMP, or Kirk Moran Potgieter, which is today part of the Saatchi group that owns that advertising agency, but that was way after my time with him.
Yeah.
But we were involved, and my main involvement at that time was in tourism, which we handled the SATO account, which the South African tourism, and we also handled the export of fruit, which was just starting to become a factor. But in those days, and fish, of course, the Lucky Star, pilchards, etc., etc. But we found it difficult to operate an operation overseas, and by having a German passport and gave me an opportunity to open an office overseas and to establish our export operations, as you can call it. Although that wasn't directly an advertising job, but it was indirectly a marketing job, and it was quite an interesting phase of our life. And
not out of Spain or out Spain or...
No, that was very much later. I mean, out of that developed today. I mean, today our fruit export business is an enormous business.
Yeah.
In those days, it was a relatively small and fledgling business rather than what it is today. So yes, it's very much different.
Okay. And then you spent a couple of years in that formal kind of advertising.
Yes, I was in advertising basically. All the time. I then decided to move to Cape Town with my aging parents.
Was that from Stellenbosch or from Joburg?
From Johannesburg.
Okay.
I was from Johannesburg to Cape Town, where I was again also involved in advertising. I, for example, handled some of the Clydesdale brands. From that side, I also was involved with the Volkswagen brand, the David, if you might call the David Kramer commercials with the Combi. That was part of that. Was my life as well. So yes, and then advertising was absolutely. I did right up until the time when I got involved in an advertising agency which I bought in Windhoek. And on my visit to Windhoek and establishing the company, I went to go and see Namibian Breweries, or those days it was called Southwest African Breweries.
Yeah.
And I got involved, and they said to me, we have a problem that with the border war, etc., SAB is getting into Namibia, and they saw it as a major threat, which I totally agree. And
just for the listeners, you were actually born in Namibia?
Yes.
You were born in Windhoek?
No, I was born in Munich, in Germany.
Munich, okay.
Came out as a little boy.
Okay.
I was 2.5 years old. And my father built the pump station at Rooibank in sort of 40 kilometers in the desert from Walvis Bay.
And was that water used to brew beer? Or
that water was basically, what happened is the Kruisberg River runs underground, and there was an enormous lake under the dunes, and they had needed someone to devise a pump station which operated 300 meters underground.
Okay.
Anyway, that was my father being engineer. Yeah. That's what he did. And so then we lived in Namibia. I went to school in Namibia, primary school, and then my parents moved to Cape Town in the 60s. And that's when I moved. We all moved to Cape Town. I completed my schooling at the German school in Cape Town, and then the University of Cape Town.
And you lived in Camps Bay?
And that's where we lived, in Camps Bay, yeah. Well, back to, 86, we went to Namibia or Southwest Africa in those days, and the challenge was, how do we defend, number one, this was the question, defend Southwest Africa breweries, the Windhoek brands and the brands they had, against the onslaught of SAB, which came via the
troops,
the war that was raging at the time. And one of the things that I came up and proposed to them was, it's no good defending a small market, which if you took the Southwest African market versus South African market itself, was probably defending a 2% market versus a 98% market. And my strategy and thoughts were, let's go and take them on in South Africa.
And they had a monopoly in Namibia.
They had monopoly in Namibia. SAB had a monopoly in South Africa.
Because by then they'd bought Swakop Breweries, eh?
No, they're not. They bought the brand. They never bought the brewery.
The Hansa brand?
Yeah.
Okay.
They bought the Hansa brand, but not the brewery.
Okay.
And what happened is basically it allowed us...
It's raining, that's nice.
Yeah. it allowed Windhoek to number one, defend, but also to able to gain volume. So whatever they lost through the border operation, to gain more of that in South Africa. And it was very simple. Go and get a small, tiny percentage of the big market, which was, in any case, worth more than losing 10-20% in Namibia, which ultimately did. And I mean, if you look at today, yes, they've lost share in Namibia, but they've gained a lot more being a Southern African brand rather than just a Windhoek or Namibian brand or Southwest African brand.
And how did the SAB beer get into South Africa? Did it come in?
Well, Namibian beer.
How did it get into Southwest on the back of
the war to the border war?
Yeah. So
basically,
did they ship in?
They shipped it to the border to supply to troops like we did, but of course from that it filtered into.
They shipped it from Joburg or somewhere, Cape Town.
Absolutely, it came in through the Caprivi, through the Kavango and Novemberland, where the war was going on, and through the South African bases which had SAB,
because they could do what they wanted there.
That's how it slowly started getting in. And we were also up there. I mean, we built our own.
No, it's fine.
We built our even the trucks in those days we had a truck delivering to Rundu and Caprivi, which was landmine proof. It actually was shaped like the military vehicles, so that we could deliver our products all the way to Caprivi and to Kavango, even in those days of the war situation up at the top.
I'm just going to move that fire quickly. We're sitting outside, and there's a lovely. You had those vehicles made for the border delivery.
Yes, so that we could actually run in those areas and avoid us losing vehicles. So we actually had prepared a truck that was actually mine-proof, just to get the stocks up there.
Very resourceful there.
Sorry?
A boer maak 'n plan.
Yeah. No, we had to. And we basically, we stepped up. We built more depots up in the north, in Rundu and in Caprivi and Novemberland. We had a strong association with the big 7 November traders who ran big beer depots.
And who were those, German guys or?
No. They were, for example, Franz Ndongo was the biggest one of them. Very powerful in that area, very dominating in terms of beer. They were liquor warehouses and food warehouses.
Owned by locals. Wow.
Owned by the local, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And we developed our relationship with them so that we were better than let's call it those days South African breweries who's coming into that market via the military.
Okay. And then tell us a little bit about how, were you involved in getting Windhoek into South Africa?
Yes, it was very much part of the strategy, and I was involved in the foundation of our first depots, i.e. Cape Town and Johannesburg.
Yeah.
We had the board authorized the purchase of interlinks, which we then ran our first beers into South Africa. And then bringing back our raw materials, i.e. glass, cans, etc., from South Africa. That worked very well in the beginning, but that was a massive operation, and I fully recall those days with the Rebel Group, who and of course Western Province Cellars, but Rebel was the first liquor chain group that was bold enough to buy 20 pallets of beer from us, which was an enormous volume, and the joy that went with the sale of that, and being able to have a pallet on the floor in a liquor store of Windhoek beer was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. So, and then that's what Bacardi Rebel is part of today. So you would have run.
That was those days was Rebel. It wasn't Bacardi Rebel.
Bacardi was something else.
Yeah, Bacardi was separate, and then they joined, and then.
And who owned or who controlled Rebel?
It was controlled, I think, by the Gilbey's group.
Okay.
They were not SAB. So, otherwise,
so can you recall? Because Liquor Town and Western Province was
one group.
Was
there was
Rembrandt?
Rebel was another group.
Okay.
Then Solly Kramers, which was breweries,
Yeah.
and then there were. Then the beginning, Liquor Cities was sort of starting to become a group. Manny
I think he's 21 years old or 22. He started in '94 at just.
Yeah, that's right. He was the latter part of.
But he was involved in the industry before that. But I don't know what he was called then.
Yes, he was. He had outlets, as I say, at the time. Many, and I know he was involved in, but not in the liquor city as we know it today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then Spot On, obviously, I don't know when that started as a franchise. Can you remember that? No.
That was a little later. That wasn't that. It was later.
Okay. So Rebel was one of your first big customers, and you opened a depot in Randburg, I think. Eh?
Yes, correct. And in Cape Town, in Belleville, and Greg Holtman was one of the who's today still in the beer business, was involved in our Cape Town operation.
Okay, and were those outsourced, or did he work there for you?
He worked for us, yeah. No, they were our own depots.
Okay.
And I mean, they were small little warehouses at the time. I mean, if I look back I look at volumes today, and I look at how we started with small warehouses and 4-ton trucks and buckies, and from where it's developed today, being a massive distribution setup with trucks and etc.
Yeah. And can you remember any names out of Joburg?
I don't.
You don't remember?
No, I don't.
I remember name George.
Yes. There was a George, but
you don't. And then obviously the Peter Hoyer, or Peter Hoyer's father was.
Peter Hoyer's father was. He then became the Durban operation. That's when we started using, which was not directly when we started using distributors.
Agents. Okay.
But the Joburg and Cape Town were own operations, where Natal was a distributor operation.
Okay. So Peter Hoyer's business, which he exited out of last year, I think it's called Beverage Emporium now. It was Team Liquor.
Yeah, Team Liquor. That's correct.
And his father owned a business which later became what is known today as Liberty Liquors in Argyle Road.
Okay.
Yeah, that's sort of the root of where he was. Okay, so I mean, how long did you work with the Windhoek? So you were working as an agency for them, or did you work for them directly?
No. Okay, I must maybe go back after that proposal, and the question was, now we're going to go to South Africa. It's not a bad idea. It is a question, who's going to do it? And then I joined Namibian Breweries, or those days Southwest African Breweries, full-time basis, and I was on their staff full-time doing the job.
Okay, and you mentioned before that when there were strikes, you had to load trucks and drive trucks.
Oh no,
I can remember hands-on completely.
I was very, very much so. I mean, we had several strikes and activities, and of course it was to boycott and to not supply beer in the north of Namibia is like it's a big factor. So when the strikers blocked us exiting the brewery, and short supply of beer up north, which was not a popular thing. I'm sure we had to do some very clever thinking of how we're going to get our beer out. And I recall one such evening we decided to load. We had a few select people who had licenses to drive those trucks. We loaded them at night, basically under minimum lighting, and we drove out the brewery early in the morning with sort of the first light before the big masses started striking, and before the masses came to block the gates, we had actually put 3 trucks through the gate and running up north to deliver beer.
Okay.
I've never been so welcome in Novemberland as I was that morning.
Were you driving one of the trucks?
Yes, I was driving one of the trucks, leading the group up there and delivering the beer to them again.
Okay.
And then coming back that afternoon, or that night again, we came again back after dark so that we could get into the brewery. And
how many kilometers would that have been?
Well, the trip from Windhoek to Wambeland is about, about 500, 600 kilometers. Yeah.
Okay.
It's
and did you work quite closely with the List family?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the whole Namibian brewery thing started? Or Windhoek Breweries? It was called Windhoek Breweries. Or
yes, it was. Remember, there was 2 breweries. There was the Windhoek Brewery and the Swakopmund Brewery.
Okay.
They were then combined when Werner List actually bought the Swakop Brewery and then amalgamated it with his Windhoek Brewery, which then led to Southwest African Breweries. That's how it was. The operation was in Talstrasse in Windhoek, in the city itself.
In the city, okay.
And I remember as a student working there in 1968, 69, and 70. I would come up for the school holidays in December, and I would help with distribution. I would help in the warehouse. I would do a little bit of marketing.
Okay. As a varsity student.
As a varsity student. So my association with Windhoek Beer goes right back to my varsity days.
Yeah. Okay.
So yes. And that I had the privilege of working very close with the family. I went to varsity with one of the sons. I knew Bernd Mascher quite well, also from university. So yes, I've been being also an old Windhoek family as such. It was nice to be associated with him and be able to help and assist and create a little bit of a privilege.
Mm. And the Althaver family, what was Althaver?
He was no longer. I mean, I'm talking my days there. It was just a name. It was no longer.
Okay.
I think originally, if the Althaver and Werner List's father were the Althaver List.
Okay.
When I knew the List, company was called Althaver List, but the Lists owned it.
Okay. And I just wanted a little rabbit hole that I've got a memory of a name, Brockman and Kries.
Yeah.
So Brockman and Kries was something that did liquor as well, and which had some association with NMK Schultz.
Yes, Brockman and Kries was in those days in Namibia. The South African liquor companies used local wholesalers. Whether it was in the food game or whether it was in liquor, they used Namibian wholesalers, distributors to market their products. So Brockman Kries was one of the old liquor distributors in Southwest Africa.
Like a Gilbey's or something.
Yeah. And for example, the Toibo family owned the Gilbey's liquor franchise. They did the Gilbey's brands, if I can call it that, in Namibia. Brockman Kries did I think Distell brands and imported brands. They were also very strong in imported brands, i.e. the Jägermeisters.
And that was the NMK equivalent. Yeah. Okay. So NMK Schultz was in South Africa, and they were the importers of, if I remember, Erdinger, Jägermeister, Straw Rum.
Correct. Yeah.
Frangelica later. What else could there have been? Aquavits and all sorts of German stuff.
A lot of German brands, and then of course NMK later became very much known for their wine, the distribution and the wine brands that they held.
Okay. And then you mentioned Toibo. We know that the Toibo family built the Wartburger Hof, which is obviously very dear to our hearts.
Correct.
And so they were actually from Wartburg and moved to Namibia? Or
yes, I think what happened, of course, the Toibo family at that time were also the agents for Bayer, and they had a massive operation in Joburg. And
Bayer Pharmaceuticals.
Correct, pharmaceutical and the aqua film business in South Africa.
Okay.
And they also owned a distribution operation in Namibia, or Southwest Africa those days, which had three legs. It had a perishable division, i.e. frozen and cold food. It had a dry goods operation, and it had a liquor operation.
Okay.
It was known as Toibo and Carson, Southwest Africa, a large, again, distributor, which, again, was very much part of the landscape in those years.
Okay. And how long did you work in Namibia? Or were you then moved back to South Africa?
Came back to South Africa in 94.
Okay.
It's basically, it was a decision which was a very difficult one for me. I mean, we loved being in Namibia. We probably would have stayed. But for personal reasons, we wanted to go back. My mom was not well at all. I wanted to spend time and look after her. And we definitely, my wife was going through infertility treatments, and it was better for us to be in South Africa and to do this, which we wanted. So it was very much for personal reasons, not for anything else.
And then you moved to the Cape?
Then moved to Cape Town.
Okay. And then out of the booze business?
Yes, I went out of the booze business. I did a bit of consulting for Vleis Central, but then I got involved in which was another love of mine, is maybe motor cars. I got involved in the motor business where I built two fuel sites. I got involved in Cape Off-Road and Safari, which was developing 4x4 vehicles at the time, selling 4x4 vehicles. And through that, I got into the Volkswagen franchise, and I bought a dealership in Malmesbury. I opened a new one in Vredenburg, and then we bought the Stellenbosch Volkswagen dealership, and basically was involved in that right up to end of last year, where I then decided to get out of the motor business for a number of reasons, and lo and behold, I talked to Greg, and we decided
that's Greg Holtman from the old Windhoek import.
Correct, from Flare Beverages, and for me to get involved in Johannesburg market, Pretoria, and KZN market, to try and establish the base for the German imported brand, which is the base for Flare Beverages. And
but before you go down there, I can remember meeting you in the 90s.
Oh, yes.
So I think you skipped that little episode. I was working for Bavaria Brau, and we had just got the agency for Holston, which Namibian Breweries held up to then, I think, until Beck's invested in Namibian Breweries, wasn't
Correct.
it?
That's you're quite right. We skipped that part. What happened is basically, although I had an interest in motor business, I also had a wine distribution operation.
Okay.
And so there was a distribution leg, and when Holston approached us at the time to help, seeing that they lost their leg through Namibia, we sort of created for an opportunity for them in the Cape Town market via our distribution operation, and then we got involved with the Bavaria, with the Funks and Bavaria, which also came back into it, and basically that operation didn't last very long. And then it just with the Bavaria, the Bulmers and Holston to a certain extent, not being just in South Africa, the volumes not being significant. We exited out of that business. But it was, I think, while we were doing it, we were talking about a period of 2 to 2.5 years, I would say, we were involved, if my memory serves me correctly.
That must have been in early 2000s?
It was late, wasn't it late 90s, early 2000s? Yeah. That around that time.
Because I briefly moved to Joburg as marketing manager for Holston.
Correct. I remember that.
That's where our paths crossed. I was working for Bavaria at the time, and we had started a joint venture with HP Bulmer Limited which was the big cider maker in
the UK.
In the UK, and obviously, and at the same time, the Holston brand happened to be available, and I think we tried to get that back on board. And I was asked to help with the Holston launch in South Africa, which really didn't work out well at all. I think Windhoek did very well with Holston, but when we tried to move it was an absolute disaster.
I think the exit and the re-entry of Holston, I think that from a brand, it took a big knock there, and it never really got to the heights again that it did previously.
There was some wonderful. I mean, I remember calling on all the big Holston customers because we had the list, and I mean, there were some really, really faithful outlets. Holston Draft was massive before we took it over, and so that's where I think our paths crossed in end of early 2000s or something, and I think it wasn't. You say it didn't last very long, 2.5 years. And then now, let's talk a little bit about Flare Beverages. So Flare's been going ever since, I think, Windhoek. Did they ever become the Windhoek agent?
No, Flare Beverages came out of the let's call it the dropping away of NMK Schultz. Okay. Greg then decided to go on his own, and he managed to get the German brands that MK Schulz had, and he started marketing those again, i.e. the Erdinger, the Paulaner, the Bitburger, etc., together with the Schladeras and the Bärenjäger, etc., etc.
Whatever could be rescued from the NMK portfolio.
Correct. And then, he handled other beers, he handled some whiskies. He had quite a widespread liquor beer portfolio, which the company still has to a certain extent, although it's less reliant on the liquor side and the beer has become a bigger factor in the whole marketing effort.
Okay, so let's look at the beers. Bitburger is a massive German Pils, isn't it?
Correct.
Probably one of the biggest draft Pils.
It was probably the biggest Pils producer in Germany.
Yeah.
They have in Germany also one of my absolute favorite Pilsers, the Königspilsner. They are a large operation.
Yeah.
Also internationally. In Africa, I think they're only represented in South Africa. I know they've now expanded into Kenya.
Mm-hmm. And that would be probably the biggest opposition of Warstein, or what do you think?
Could be, yeah. But as I say, that's Bitburger. The Erdinger brand, of course,
Bitburger is a typical German Pilsner. You just drink as much as you... And it's available everywhere in a small little Pilsner glass on tap.
It's available on tap. It's available in the 330 ml. And I think today one of the big absolute potentials for Bitburger is their Bitburger Drive, their non-alcoholic product, which is really starting to find a lot of customers and a lot of supporters. Yeah. And I think that in itself is I think that's a trend worldwide. Where if I think of back in the Kronenbrau days, we're launching Kronenbrau Light, which is the first light beer, and today to actually have a beer that tastes like a beer, and that is and that has got no alcohol or absolutely so little that you can't call it alcohol.
Okay, and then in the portfolio we've got Paulaner, which is obviously, I think it's 49% owned by Heineken, isn't it? Or is it not?
I'm not sure. Okay. You're actually saying something which I'm not sure myself. I mean, Paulaner known as one of the old Munich breweries. Yeah. Together with the Löwen and the Hacker and etc.
One of the few that's at Oktoberfest,
and one of the ones that has a massive tent in the Oktoberfest.
And still controlled by a family.
It's still a family controlled, as I say. It might be a shareholding some international. I'm not sure of that, but it's definitely a name. If you Munich, Paulaner, and beer are synonymous with one another.
And then obviously the massive Weissbier brand of Erdinger, which is a massive export brand.
Absolutely. I mean
everybody reminds me, I drink this when I'm skiing somewhere or when I'm there. I'm drinking. Everybody always drinks Erdinger. And
I think with the Bavarian Weissbiers, where Erdinger was probably being the most international of all, has become the sort of benchmark in today with all the craft breweries. People brewing Weissbier, I believe the Erdinger Weiss brand, over 300 years of Weissbier brewing is the benchmark. I mean, they've managed to perfect it. I do believe it's absolute top in, and as much as everybody else is starting to brew Weissbiers, Erdinger and the Munich Weissbiers are where it all started, because that is the traditional form of beer making and drinking in Bavaria.
I mean, it's not the most flavorful beer, I think. Out of there's definitely some Weiss beers like even Paulaner, which I think has got more flavor and more spice in it. But it's certainly, as a brand, it's got massive appeal. Eh?
Yeah, I think if from a personal point of view, I think Paulaner is a more tastier Weiss. Where Erdinger is a very much balanced Weiss beer. It appeals to a wider. That's why I think it's become such a world brand, because it has a wider appeal. And of course they've created the clear one, the Cristal. So they again catering for those who maybe not want to really have the traditional cloudy Weiss beer. They've got a filtered Weiss beer, etc. So, yes, I think it's become just a big international brand.
And just in closing, you are now setting up this business nationally for Flare Beverages, setting up Joburg and KZN, and I guess filling in the gaps in the rest of the country. So you're finishing off your career selling beer again.
Yes, absolutely, and it's delightful to be back in the industry, and it's actually, I find it quite amazing that so many people I bump into still in the liquor trade today, and some of them do even remember me, and so it's actually quite gratifying to be able to be back and to apply the knowledges, and I can say today, it's not different to what it was in those days.
When you started,
it is just 10 times bigger. It's just 10 times more, but it's as challenging. And I find that the big thing which we applied and applied throughout my years in the liquor business is to offer good service, and I think that core principle today is still very much so. If you offer a product, you supply service with that product, you look after your customers, they will support you, and you will go somewhere. And that to me is no doubt that hasn't changed. And unfortunately, it doesn't. Not all companies apply that same principle, but I believe very strongly in service levels and looking after our customer. And to me, that's always given me success, and I'm pretty sure it will help me on this last venture of mine to again achieve success.
And you're not revealing everything, because there are some exciting things on the horizon, and I mean, I don't know how much you can share with us, but certainly there's some stuff happening, and we look forward to hearing about those. I mean,
yes, there is definitely interesting developments. I think everybody believes in craft market being a growing part of the South African beer market and beer scene, and no doubt it's there. And I think we are looking at some exciting developments in that segment of the market. And put you, as I say, watch the space, and we'll just talk again later in the year. But there are exciting things in the pipeline, and I think there's opportunity. I think the mass market, which is dominated by the big brands, of course, South African breweries,
and
there are people that are just wanting to have something different, to be able to experience something. I mean, we in the wine industry, if you look at that explosion, if you take that over the last 40 years, from where it all started with a Stein and a late harvest, and today what amazing amount of wines we've got. And I think the same thing we're seeing in the beer. People are just sick and tired of a standard A, B, C. That's it. Now you have a variety. You have how many Weiss beers on the market? 20 years ago, who'd have thought of a Weiss beer?
Even SAB's making Weiss beer.
Even SAB's now attempted to make a Weiss beer. So, but I think that's all exciting. So there's a new development. People are able to have a variety look at. You'll be able to buy something different. You're not having to go and select one out of 4 brands or 5 brands. You've got 20, 30, 40, 50 at both on and off con. We have some lovely draft outlets today who have 20 odd different beers on tap. What a wonderful experience that you used to have in Germany, and in the UK, where you had these big beer houses and pubs that would offer you this variety. Now we've got it coming in South Africa, so hurrah, just go for it.
So I think, Manfred, I mean, I'm grateful that I could share this with you, and I can just see how the beer culture has developed from the early 70s to now. I mean, we've experienced it. My first exposure with Bavaria and NMK Schultz bringing in those wonderful beers from all over the world. And I think, I'm very excited to hear about what the future holds for you, and I wish you many more happy years in the beer industry. And I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Absolutely. Thanks, Holger. I appreciate it. And I think it's nice. And, I think this whole thing started with your book, which sort of put a bit of a, let's call it a framework on South African beers and where we are. And I think it's exciting for me to look back on the 70s and look today in the 2000s and see how the beer industry is grown up and it's diversified and there are opportunities out there which I think are fantastic.
Yeah. Wonderful.
And nice to be back and nice chatting to you. Thanks.
Thank you. And now it's time for a beer. And I think we're going to have one of those. We're going to either have a Tafel or we're going to have a Erdinger a Picantos. But I think we'll start with the Tafel Lager just to celebrate your heritage and then end off with the Erdinger Picantos in those beautiful glasses. And guys, if you haven't seen those Erdinger Picantos glasses, ask at your local beer house or at Capital Craft or Ziggy's if you're in KZN. It's really a celebration of beer. So thank you, Manfred, and we'll chat again and catch up soon. Cheers.
Thanks, Holger.
Thanks for joining us today, and thanks to Manfred. Thanks for all the lessons. And it's interesting how history repeats itself. And I look forward to chatting to you again soon. Cheers.